In this segment, we're going to look at technological innovations that enabled Europeans to cross vast oceans. They had a strong desire for exploration, but how did they do it? What kind of technology did they have to enable them to travel long distance? The Portuguese made improvements upon navigational instruments of Chinese and Arab origin, such as the magnetic compass and the astrolabe. The astrolabe allowed sailors to determine their location at sea from the angle of the sun above the horizon. By the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century, there were better maps that have mapped, the oceans and some of the coastline. Also, those maps could guide sailors better at sea. But the most important development was the development of new ship. This is the Portuguese caravel. The Portuguese basically introduced a new kind of rigging for their ships. The rigging is basically the apparatus through which the force of wind is used to propel ships. So what did they do? Well, they basically combined on their ships two types of sails. The triangular lateen sail, as you can see at the front of the ship, and the square rigged sail in the middle of the ship. The triangular lateen sail was basically used in the Mediterranean to capture the light winds of the Mediterranean, and the square rigged sail was basically used to capture the heavy winds of the Atlantic. So when you combine these two types of sail on one ship, you enabled it to travel in different sea conditions. So this ship can travel also long distance. Later, the Portuguese also added cannon to their ship, and with cannon fire, they could very easily capture port cities. So the Portuguese were the first to travel. As you can see, geographically, they were really well situated to be leaders in traveling, even though they were a small country. They first sort of traveled gradually along the west coast of Africa in search of gold and other materials. Then eventually they circumnavigated the southern tip of Africa. They sailed through the Indian Ocean, the famous Vasco da Gama voyages, and they reached the Spice Islands of what is present-day Indonesia. So they basically were able to cut the middleman, which is the Muslim Empire, the Ottomans at the time that controlled the land routes to Asia. The Portuguese at this point weren't really able, and they weren't really interested in establishing land empires. They basically established ports along the western coast of Africa, and they were interested in trading rather than conquering the local people. The next explorers were the Spanish. The Spanish had just unified their country. Spain achieved unification with the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel of Castile in 1469. Now it is a strong Catholic power. They have just finished their long process of reconquista or reconquest of the lands that were controlled by the Moors, Muslim Moors. Finally, Spain was able to take over all this territory. Spain is strong, unified. It's driven by this new religious fervor after its long struggle against Islam, and it's ready to spread its Catholic faith to new places and new people. The sailor that ushered the Spanish explorations was Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, a seafaring republic in northern Italy, and he had a very good experience in sailing. He was an experienced sailor. He sailed to Africa, to England. He was even in a shipwreck that was sunk by the French of Portugal. So, as I already said in the earlier segment, the Portuguese were looking for an alternative route to Asia by traveling east. Christopher Columbus also was interested in a route to Asia, to China, to India, to where all these spices and precious commodities are located. But he said, we're not going to travel east, we're going to sail west instead. So he wanted to reach the Indies by sailing west. The Indies meaning East Asia. He was also a very religious man. He had a religious self-understanding. He was sort of driven by a divine calling. He wanted to spread Christianity to new people. Perhaps these newly converted Christians will become allies, and they will be enlisted in the fight against Muslims in the fight to reconquer the lost Jerusalem and the Holy Land. What is also very interesting about Columbus is that he made a very important geographical mistake and miscalculation. Many of his contemporaries agreed with Columbus that yes, you could sail west and potentially, eventually, crossing the Atlantic, you'll reach Asia. Nobody knew that there was a whole continent on the way to Asia. But what Columbus' contemporaries disagreed with Columbus is that they believed that the circumference of the Earth was much larger than what Christopher Columbus calculated. Christopher Columbus believed that it will be much shorter time to cross the Atlantic because he miscalculated the circumference of the Earth. And because most of Columbus' contemporaries knew that he had the wrong calculations, he had trouble finding a patron, a sponsor for his trips. So he was going from one courthouse to another in search for a patron. Eventually, it is the Queen of Spain, Isabella, that agreed to fund Columbus. So at the age of 41, Columbus set sail with 3 small ships from Spain on August 3rd, 1492. So this is his first voyage. His ships sailed for 33 days. Sailors were getting restless. Eventually, they spotted land on August 12th, and so they landed on an island of the Bahamas. Columbus is going to find Native Americans whom he called the Indians because he believed he had discovered that he was in India, that he was in Asia, but they had their own name called the Taino people. He will take some of them back to Spain. He will have several more trips, 4 altogether. He will also travel to what is present-day Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. And until the rest of his life, he remained convinced that he had achieved his goal of reaching Asia by crossing the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't realize, or he didn't want to admit, that he had discovered a brand new land.